this is the third section of a painting called Rosenberry Drive in Idaho. And I'm showing you first the palette that the artist uses. And this would be the cool side, the warm side, and the earth tones. We have French ultramarine, cobalt, Prussian, cerulean, viridian on the cool side. We have alizarin crimson, cadmium red, cadmium yellow, and I have a color called New Gamboge, which is a very brilliant yellow, and cadmium yellow light. We have raw sienna, we have raw umber, burnt sienna, Payne's gray, and ivory black. Now this is a John Pike palette, my very favorite. This is the thinking area, and this is where we get enough pigment and enough water to run a clean, clear wash. Today's session will teach on watercolor wash. I will show you the brushes that are going to be used. Now we start with the aquarelle. This is a 1 inch, this is a 1/2 inch aquarelle, and we have smaller ones that will also come into play later on. We start with a large brush and move gradually to the smaller brushes. This was an aquarelle that I bought maybe 50 years ago, and of course it's still taped, but it's still good because it's made with pure Kolinsky sable, and the sable brush, each hair is set in the ferrule all the way down to here. And the only thing that happened here is this brush got a little loose over the years. This is a round and a number 12 and an awesome, beautiful painting brush, and it just holds a lot of water. The rounds hold a tremendous amount of water, and this is why they're used and called first wash brushes. The smaller ones are this, a number 6, also red sable, made in the same way, and a very fine brush. This has a little place where the hand kind of fits. And of course we have the rigger, and I love the rigger for small fine lines. And there are many other brushes that are used along the way. One of them is a hockey brush, and the hockey brush is what I'm going to start with today. And I'm going to run a coat of water across my paper, and I'm going to use plenty of water. It's going to be saturated. This will be a cool underpainting and a warm underpainting. So the hockey brush is the first brush to use. Sometimes on very large paper, these wonderful brushes can be used. And sometimes when you have paper that's very, very big, you would use a 5-inch hockey brush. All right, I've already showed you the palette and the brushes, and I'll mention a little bit about the paper. This is 100% The Arches watercolor paper. It is beautiful handmade paper, and it is a lovely, lovely tooth. It's not too regular. It's got enough tooth to make the surface interesting. And when you run certain colors, they will find the pigment just resting right on the surface. And you'll see that today with French ultramarine. Now, I'm letting it wet. Just wait just a moment or two, but now I'm ready to start. And we already saw a value study. The value study comes in middle value. What I'm doing now will be light value, and we begin with the color that I am most pleased with as an underpainting color, and that would be a warm yellow ochre. And I didn't mention that a minute ago on my palette. I should have, but it has a nice warm glow, and it just flows real nicely. So I'm going to start with that right at the horizon, and warm underpainting is the very first thing we do in watercolor. And that warm is going to be over here on this shoreline. So I'm going to add a bit of that. And also I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna down in this area. Burnt sienna is a beautiful, warm, reddish earth tone, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. And that with yellow ochre will just do the trick. Also, there may be a bit of the yellow ochre that will come into this area with the little boats later on. And this being the first wash, I want to gently indicate that just by placing that color over the little boats that are going to be there. Now, one of the important parts of this picture will be the light that is going to flow across this area, and it's the warm glow of the sun on this hill, and it will be very striking. So I want to indicate that warm underpainting on the hillside as we start. Also, in considering what's coming in this picture, we have the light reflected down into the water. So I want to show in the foreground how pretty that will be, and also some suggestion of the flow of the yellow over here. Now this is the first wash, light value, and the next color I'm going to put in here is going to be French ultramarine blue, and it will be at the horizon, down to the horizon, pardon me. And in order to make this work, I'm going to be able to tip the board, and as it will gently bring the wash down. Now I'm going to start right here, and I'll follow the bead. Again, there's going to be enough water so it will flow easily, just like this. And you begin to see the bead, which is this, and you follow that right down. And you're careful not to put too much, but you just judge the amount that you need, the amount of water. I'm going to leave perhaps a little peak of a cloud. Now I'm coming down to where the yellow is, so I'm going to actually turn the board on its side, so I'll be able to control it. And I'm going to bring it this way, and I'm going to use a little bit more water and a little less pigment as I come down over the yellow. All right. This will form a very nice sky right down to the mountaintop. I'm going to let it sit this way for a minute or two. I may pull off a cloud like this, like that. Oh, there we go. I like that. Sometimes you go back in and take away the little bit of the hard edge. And I'm buying a few minutes here by just suggesting some ideas before I turn the paper back. Now the next thing is to take just a touch of alizarin and place it right into that wash. And remember, this is still warm and cool underpainting. This is the light first wash. And I'm going to come in on this side because there is a little mountain that comes this direction. All right, and I'm going to place it there, and I'm going to add a little bit of alizarin crimson to it, and it will have a lovely color. Now, if I use it once, I need to use it again, and I'll turn it back this way, and I'm going to bring it in here as the color I use, and I need to flip to a smaller brush. For the moment, I need to go into my rigger and suggest these cast shadows that are going to come up over the hill, and they'll be dropped right in to the warm underpainting. And again, I used alizarin and French ultramarine to create a really soft and a really pretty gray. Just like that. All right. And one of these trees is actually down here on the sandy area. I think that will do. Going back into the next hill, there will be gray areas in there as well. And there's a little suggestion of a distant hill way over there. All right. Next, I'm going to come and drop this gray color, which is light value, a mixture of the warm and cool French ultramarine and alizarin crimson is the tonality of red that I want to use, and I'll be dropping it over there. Also on that hillside are bits of yellow, and I'm going to use, instead of the yellow, I'm going to use the raw sienna for the little glimmers of hillside over in here. All right. Oh, that works really well. Now there is a sandy beach over here, and I don't want to forget indicating that we're still on light value. All right, there we go. This little peninsula is duplicated over here on this right-hand side. I seem to have lost it in that value, but I can bring it back in a minute. All right, now this gives you a suggestion of the light first wash, and on the beach I can indicate a little bit more of the sandy beach, and dry brushing it and spattering is always a good idea. And at the moment I don't have my spatter brush, so unfortunately it's a wonderful brush to use to spatter, and it got lost here for the moment. One of the things you can use instead of a toothbrush is an old oil painting brush, and that works too. So I'll just use that for now and try to spatter with it. And oh, it works pretty well. Again, I'm going to dive into the gray that I had made on the palette. This thinking area will contain all these beautiful puddles. Each puddle, one is cool and one is warm. Now, if I hold up that palette right now, it would simply run all over the place. So you'll have to trust me for that. I have two puddles. I have a warm puddle and a cool puddle. And here I'm spattering with an old oil painting brush right on the foreground of this beach. There we go. I like that. Now, the next thing to do is to go back to my palette, and now I need to find a really clean spot because I need another puddle. So this is time to wipe it clean. Sometimes we use two palettes in order to have a freedom and continuity, and you don't go slowly, but you move fast and very quickly. The watercolor artist learns to move very quickly. So the next and most important thing will be to produce the underpainting for the water. And I'm going to do vertical strokes, and I'm going to re-wet the area because it has dried from the earlier moment that we placed it with a hockey brush. But this time I'm going to be very specific about where I want the watercolor to flow. What's important to know is that water seeks its own level. So here I'm going over. That yellow is already dried, and I can go right into the water area. I'm going to use a beautiful blue, which I like very much, and it would be called Prussian. And let's see if I can get a nice Prussian blue over here. It is a brighter blue, and this is a bright and a beautiful day on Lake Coeur d'Alene. And so I'm going to do this, and where it goes over the yellow, you of course produce a hint of green. And I'm going around the little boats, and I'm going to be very carefully going around the end of the peninsula, still vertical. I'm going to still add the color, very bright. It becomes a little brighter as we come towards the shore. And now I will add just a touch of Viridian, which is that beautiful green. Oh, there it comes. Just love this color, turquoise. There we are, real pretty. Now the next thing to do is to go back with French ultramarine, and we now have the opportunity to make it look highly reflective. So to do that, you crisscross it this way. And since there's trees at the end here, remembering, I'm going to put these horizontal lines with French ultramarine. I'm going to drop them into the water like this. All right. I'm just having the best time. I really do love to paint. And I love to do landscape. Now there's a lot of trees that will be reflecting directly down into the water right at this point. All right. And over here, there are many, many trees up on that hillside. So I'm just going to show how they reflect down into water. And there's one out here too. I'll just put a little indication. And you see with the fact that it's still wet, the reflections will blur. And the artist wants that to happen. All right, and just a little indication as it goes into this inlet, which actually might end up being a little darker. I think I like that better. All right. All right, I like that. Now the next thing to do is to go up into the hillside, and there's many cast shadows that are cast off the trees down that hillside, and there's also cast shadows from the clouds above, and there's wonderful rocks along the shoreline. So I want to be able to indicate those with a little darker gray, and I'm moving into this value. And I'm going to start with the shadowed color because it's so strikingly in contrast to the warms. And I'm going to put a little bit more over here because it will be on the ground above the sand and certainly will be under the tree. All right, so the next thing I'm going to look at is going to be a shadow on this side of the little boat. And this sets us off very nicely. And here we utilize what is called lost and found edge. I've got a bit of a bead, so I don't really want it to run, so I'm going to pick it off there before it gets into the cool. This is the shade side of the boat, and I'm wanting to define the three little boats that we have here. So I'll use lost and found edge, and this would be the rudder that is similar on all three of them. And later we'll put a cast shadow underneath that. All right, there may be a few little rocks or things that you want to add on the shore, driftwood and so on. All right, I'm going to use another brush as I go up into the round. I need my round brush for some reason. Again, I need to locate that. So having done so, I will work up on the distant hill and begin with the trees. Now I'm going to mix the yellow and the blue together. I always like to make my own green. And so we start way over here in the background. Actually, I should probably start this way, way back over here on the distant hill, just an indication of the trees, and it's all just full of trees. And I might not want it to be a brighter green, so I'll go back in and dull that down a little bit. Distant hill trees, just like that. And you just use the shape of the brush to do that. All right, now I'm going to start in with the trees. And again, I'm using kind of a grayed out green. The green has been mixed with what was left on the palette, and I like to call that palette gray. It's a combination of all the results of the thinking area. And I just want to be very generous with my strokes and know that this hill is just loaded with trees. Now the artist is going to decide how many, and there's something that we do, and I know this might sound a little strange, but we do let the painting talk to us. It has a voice and a language, all of its own. And if you've painted for a long time, as I have, you kind of learn to listen to what the composition is telling you. And we've already learned about composition. We've learned about the horizon line. We've learned about the strong verticals, and those are going to be the masts of the ship. And of course, the trees are the reinforcing verticals, and there may be a plethora of those on this hillside. Remembering that there is contrast, that's one of the principles of art. There's contrast, there's balance, there's symmetry, there's asymmetry. So you have both contrast and you have similarity. In other words, you don't want the picture to be boring, but you don't want it to be lacking continuity either. So the painting is going to say to you, come on, let's put another tree down here. What about here? And if you have a shadow, you got to have a tree that's giving that shadow. So it's really important to think as you go through your picture. And I'm going to pick this up in just a moment in our next session. We are beginning session number 4 of this picture that was done at the Coeur d'Alene Lake, and it's called Rosenberry Drive. Now we began with looking at the composition, the overall plan, and we chose the horizontal thumbnail over the vertical thumbnail, as it seemed to be most capturing of the beautiful scene that we have before us. Now we began with reinforcing the horizontals with these lines that will indicate the distant hill, Tubbs Hill, and the little cove that's in the foreground, and the fact that there will be a shoreline, and there will be a series of little boats down here in the foreground. And I'm just going to indicate their placement on this sketch paper. Now, up here we have samples of the general layout, which is called value painting. And this is a cool value painting, and this is a warm value painting. Today's session will involve the wash, and we begin by wetting the overall paper. And I'm using a rather broad aquarelle brush for this. And I'll saturate the entire paper with clear water. And I have a beautiful piece of 100% paper, which is d'Arches, and it responds perfectly to watercolor, which is called aquarelle transparent watercolor. we let the white of the paper be a part of the finished product. Now for this session, we're going to start with yellow ochre, and the yellow ochre will be mixed with just a touch of cadmium yellow medium. And I'm going to lift the board up to put it on a little less of an angle. And we're going to begin at the horizon, allow the yellow just to give a little sense of atmosphere. And there will be reflected light that will drop down through the water like this. And we want to use enough pigment also going up the shoreline over here, because there will be cast shadows from trees along the shore. And this being warm underpainting, we're going to add a bit of raw sienna to this wash and a bit of burnt sienna and indicate that in the foreground. And the foreground will carry a bit more pigment because there will be rocks and different fragments of driftwood on the beach. So we want to put that in place in the very beginning. We have enough pigment so that there's a lot of interest and possibilities going forward. Again, this hill is going to have cast shadows going up, and I'm going to lift this just a little bit so you can see it a little bit better there. Now, as we begin this warm underpainting, we are using cadmium yellow, and we're letting the cadmium yellow reflect down into the water, and we're seeing the yellow on the horizon, and we see the cadmium yellow medium up the hill very strong, so that as we apply the cast shadows, there will be a strength of contrast between the light and the dark. Over here on the hill, we're going to put just touches of yellow on that side. Now, watercolor has a tendency to fade about 10 degrees. We're going to allow the water just to flow right through the high reflections. And as we come into the second part of the first wash, we're going to be using French ultramarine blue, and we're going to start at the very top and bring it in to meet the wonderful shadows and the wonderful haze at the horizon. Now, as we flow down with the cool underpainting, there will be something that is called a bead. Now, a bead just flows naturally because water seeks its own level. And just before you lose the bead, you bring it a little bit further. And you let it flow again, adding a bit more pigment and a bit more water. And as you do, the bead will flow until you get down to meet where the cadmium yellow is. And now we should have a nice, even, wonderful flow from, it's called a graduated wash. Now I'm going to add a little bit more pigment to the top. There. And now I'm going to mingle a couple of these colors together for a few distant random clouds. There. That's really nice. There are times, however, when it works to turn the board this way so that the wash will flow in the direction of the edge of the paper, and it won't add too much pigment into the yellow, because this blue and this yellow, unless you know how to handle it really easily, have some difficulty. All right. All right, that should be just about right. I'm going to turn it again. And as I do, I'm going to look over here at the mountain on this side, and I'm going to start a very faint wash, and I'm going to mingle French ultramarine and a little bit of alizarin, and that will come in for this distant mountain. Just like this. And it's a very soft lavender. All right. Now as we move forward to the next hill, we've already established the downward flow of the hill with the warm underpainting. And now I want to place a little bit of burnt sienna into the hill for more contrast. And I'm going to move to a smaller brush, and we'll begin to add some of the earth forms down here close to the water's edge, just like that. All right. Now another part of the flow will be the water, and it will pick up reflection. We want to do this just from all the way from the distant shore all the way down to where the little boats will be. And we're flowing down with the water. It's already been wet, so it should work very nicely. And here we have the suggestion of high reflection, and I'm going to change from what I've used here, which is the Prussian blue, into Viridian. And that comes into the cove. Now we have several shades, and we're still not through with the various reflections. And now we start horizontal strokes, and we're even going to use another blue. This time we'll use cobalt blue, and we'll go horizontally with that. And right back up at the shoreline, and we'll indicate cast shadow trees right into the water, and this is going to be reflective of trees that aren't there yet. I love that. And there they are. Wonderful reflections into the water. And if you want it a little bit stronger, you can add the Prussian. Prussian will be the strongest blue. And just allow that to run down. Not too far, but just about like that. And then you pick up the horizontals. So now we have highly reflective water. And again, remembering that the ripples also are in perspective and give you a sense of depth and distance. Now, a lot of this I worked out in this picture, but I wanted to explain it more carefully, so I did it again. Now we're ready to proceed. We have alizarin, we have French ultramarine, we're making a lavender. And again, we're going to move to a smaller brush. And as we do, we'll use the lavender in the far distant shore again. And I'm going to show distant trees this way, just like this. The distant trees, little vertical strokes, giving a suggestion, and they are enormous trees, but it's far against the shoreline, way over there. So in order to do that, you do small vertical strokes, and every bit of the brush, each stroke is a different tree. And I love this technique. It's really fun. Now we're ready to come into the cast shadows that are on this hill, and the cast shadows drop right down and also into the rocks that are on the shoreline. Now we can also add that same color, this lavender, which I made with alizarin and French ultramarine, and we could use that with a little more strength on this hill over here, because there are many trees and they're casting shadows going up the hill. So here we have the strength of those shadows and indicating that they are going to be trees. Now we have the opportunity to show the shape of the various boats that are going to be right here in this area. And I want to do them as one shape. And later on, I will define it with shade and shadow. And also coming back with more of the raw sienna into the foreground, the sandy beach underneath. Again, these are all underpainting, and the artist has a lot of fun adding details and whatever else is needed on the shoreline. The other thing the artist loves to do is to spatter suggestions of rocks and on the foreground, just like this. All right. And we use a small bristle brush or a toothbrush for that purpose. Now the trees on the distant shore are done, and now we'll move to the next mountain, and this will be Tubbs Hill. And it has just hundreds of trees. It's absolutely beautiful terrain. And I have already started another picture showing that, and I'm going to give an indication of how that was accomplished. So you use the side of your brush. This is an aquarelle, and detailing it this way. Little short strokes going up the hill. And again, you're just gently kind of dancing across the surface and allowing the brush to do the work for you. And the picture will actually speak to you. It will tell you this is where you need another tree, or not there, or that, not that tree. That doesn't work. It'll also tell you maybe you should add a little bit of red tone in here, or maybe it should be a little duller color. So the picture itself will offer the details that you need. If you just listen, the composition is to be balanced, but also it's to have contrast. So you have things that are similar and things that are dissimilar, and you allow that to work. Now this will take quite a bit of time to add all the trees, different heights, and different shapes of brushes. Sometimes we use a rigger brush, which is shaped like this, and you come in to the trees and you can add verticals and very fine lines. Distant trees don't have to be too exacting. There can be a suggestion of it. And also there are wonderful trees that were actually at the end of this peninsula. And unfortunately, we have very high winds sometimes in Coeur d'Alene. And for that reason, we often lose our trees. So one of the things we could do is to try to remember what was out there. And so I'm going to do just that right now and remember that there was a wonderful little tree on this hill over here. And I'm just going to put it in as I remember it to be. And this had a series over here as well. And remember the numbers 3, 5, and 7, not wanting to use an even number. Paintings love to have odd numbers. It brings more interest. And this is kind of a compositional rule. So I'm going to add a bit of color on that and make the rocks a little firmer. And they will be coming along the land just like this. And you can see what happens when we begin to strengthen the picture. All right, and I'll hold this a little closer so you can see how that's working. Now this concludes session number 4.